Good afternoon and welcome to the AfterWords program. Reverend Deja Nava, excuse me, and thank you for today's sermon. The scripture for the sermon today is from the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. This chapter reflects the period when Moses was called by God and his response or an answer to that call. The story indicates that Moses stopped what he was doing and made himself available to answer God's call. How do we, like Moses, turn away from the distractions of the world and make ourselves available to answer the call?
Thank you for having me. And it's from the moment I read that scripture, initially I just thought it was Moses's experience. Like, wow, look at what happened to him. And then I realized that each of us has those moments where we are called to do something greater than ourselves. And we just have to be intentional about it. It's not like it sounds a certain kind of way or we're in a certain kind of place. I can think that, over my lifetime, I've had certain instances where I felt just an inner desire or urging that just wouldn't let me forget about it. And once I addressed it, I realized that this was something that it was intentional for me to do. So I think each of us have those moments, but it's up to us each to make ourselves open to the possibility of doing something greater with our lives.
Thank you. And I'm curious, could you maybe elaborate more how this example, your example in the sermon, may be applicable to us as people living in today's world with all that's going on in the world today?
Well, you were right when you said that there are many distractions going on. It's hard to keep up with the day-to-day activities. At one point you would think, wow, there's a lot going on with the election coming up. And, a lot of people were talking about the debate, what it was and what it wasn't. And there's an inner feeling that I have that, wow, we need to say something about this. And I thought about how many times we'll have a feeling and say, wow, somebody needs to do something about it. And then we forget that we could be someone that does say something about it. Somebody asked me, well, what did you think about it? And I said, well, here's the thing. My decision about who I want to support in the upcoming election has nothing to do with what they do on a stage, but what their actions are, what their motives are, what their intent is. But having that thought myself, it's not enough. I need to share that thought with somebody else rather than thinking about why is it that I feel that way? Because other people may share that same feeling, but are afraid to voice it, afraid to act on it. So I immediately began to share my opinion with other people, to share my thoughts with other people. And each opportunity I get, I say, you know what? We need to look at what's really on the line when it comes to our survival as a people, as a community, as a country, as a world. We are living in a world that is dominated by a lot of evil forces and different things happening. And we can't just turn the blind eye and say, well, that's their problem over there. I'm glad that's not happening to me. It's like saying you're in a cone of influence when a hurricane comes. You hope that cone doesn't spread out to attract you, but it is influencing and affecting people who are in its path. And we're all in the path of destruction if we don't do something to change the trajectory in terms of what's happening in today's world. My first encounter with someone who was a part of the Shrine of the Black Madonna was when I was in middle school. I was in the 8th grade, and he was my typing teacher. And, I just thought this was here. I got a cool teacher. This is really good. And he said, you need to come to my church. And I was like, you go to church? Because he didn't seem like the type that went to church. He said, yeah. I said, what church you go to? He said, I go to the Shrine of the Black Madonna. I said, the Shrine of the Black Madonna, that's a different kind of name. He said, yeah, well, we believe, in doing things for Black people. And I said, oh, I never heard a church talk like that. But, at that time, I was like maybe 12 years old. And then later, when I got in high school, my high school counselor, I found out was a member of the Shrine of the Black Madonna. And he was encouraged. He said, yeah, you students, we'd be in his office talking. He said, y'all should come out to the Shrine of the Black Madonna. I still didn't go then. But when I got to be a senior, my brother, who was a freshman at the University of Michigan, heard Reverend Albert B. Clegg speak at his school. And he came back, he said, "This is a church you need to go to. We need to go to the shrines of the Black Madonna." And I was like, wow, if you're this excited, and my brother was a member of the Black Action Movement, I said, this is really has got to be something. I didn't realize all the time that God was calling me to do something. So I finally said I was going to go to the church, and I was with one of my friends. And when we got there, it just seemed like everything fell into place. And then I was getting ready to walk down the aisle, and she was in the way, and I was like, "Move." She said, "Where are you going?" "I'm trying to join." I said, "I'm trying to join too." But all the time it was like God was calling me, and I didn't recognize it until at some point I was able to pay attention. And that's what I meant by answer the call. God calls us at different points, but sometimes it's difficult. We don't really pay attention, but when we do, it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I think uh, I can relate to that, but I also think, and this is part of the reason why I really wanted to kind of tease that out. That, people have rationalized all kind of things that they think is God calling them,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you just know when you know, and you're compelled to move. I remember when I joined. I don't even remember. I just got up and went down the aisle, and the rest is history. I mean, it's like the difference in knowing when you're in alignment and when you're not. So I
Exactly.
can relate to what you said.
Yeah. The night that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, I remember I was at home alone. My parents and my brothers had gone somewhere, and the message came over the television. And when I heard that he had been shot, and then a few minutes later, I heard that he had not survived, I said to myself, "Oh, somebody did something terrible." And then I said, "They in trouble. Somebody need to do something." And then as I was pacing back and forth, waiting for my parents to come home, I kept saying, "Who's going to do something about this? Who's going to do something?" But it was a feeling that I couldn't shake. And even though I was a young child, I just knew it wasn't right. But I didn't know what to do with that feeling. And I guess it was a feeling that stayed with me throughout my lifetime. And so finally, as I got older, I began to respond. So earlier when you said, "What do you do with that fear?" Because there was a fear that came over me as a child, thinking I'm helpless to do anything about it, but I know something's wrong. And it used to be a feeling that I had, that I would tell myself, "I'm too young to understand now, but I'm going to remember this moment so that when I get older, I know what to do with this feeling." And so I think that that's something that addresses that what you mentioned earlier about what do you do when there's a fear that you have to respond, and not knowing whether or not this is God calling you or this is just an urge that you're acting on.
What you just said made me think about this idea that some people say there's really only two emotions, love and fear. And if you're not operating out of one, you're operating out of the other. And I know for a fact that the three of us have been a part of this community long enough to know or have found ourselves in places or able to sustain all type of conditions or circumstances that only love, a love for our people would be able to enable us to do. And I'm immediately thinking about things like MOR trips and, encountering people in maybe not so nice circumstances and digging within yourself and reminding yourself, of course, this community reinforces it in us a love for our people, which I think has driven us to even have come this far as members and as a collective community.
Right. I think sometimes you can be driven by both, but the fear does not have to incapacitate you. It just lets you know that you understand that there's, without action, that something dire may happen.
And that could be love.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you think about some stories we've heard about mothers doing all kind of gaining strength they never had,
Lord.
it may have immediately been fear that their child was going to get hurt, but it was the love for that child, I think, that was able to eradicate or prevail over the fear, because you can become frozen with fear.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think love will compel you to act.
Right. Yeah, you do things that you didn't normally think you could do, and respond in ways that you thought were uncommon to other people. But I think and that's the thing I think about God's call, is that it can happen at any moment. It could be as simple as don't go out today. And then you can find out that if you had gone out, then maybe you have been caught up in some kind of traffic jam or some kind of traffic accident. So it's different things that when we listen to our intuitive instincts, it makes a difference in terms of what we do and how we live our lives.
And you mentioned fear. Could you say a little bit more about how we may be able to overcome the fear that stops us from acting or sharing or speaking out?
Well, I
More.
think it's a hesitancy. We can say fear, but it's really a hesitancy to think that what we feel doesn't matter in the larger scheme of things, when what each person does makes a difference. Just imagine what would have happened if Dr. King had said, my feelings about what's happening to people doesn't matter. I'm just one country preacher in Atlanta, Georgia. How can I influence other people? Or Malcolm X, figuring that he just had to think about himself. Or even the founder of our church, the Reverend Albert B. Clegg Jr., who said that because his mother told him that Jesus was Black and that his mother was a Black Madonna, that he could just keep that information to himself and not share it with the world. We have to realize that what we feel and what we think is important, because God has given each of us an inner divinity, a power and creative intelligence that we can use and we can act upon. And it's when we act upon it that it makes a difference. And the hesitancy sometimes is being perpetuated by misinformation or propaganda, thinking that what one person does doesn't matter, when what everyone does make a difference.
I'm reminded of a song by Big Sean. The title of the song is "One Man Can Change the World." Of course, we could say one man or woman, but we know also that we are all integrally connected as a whole. How does one discern if what they're feeling or thinking or maybe perceiving themselves to be called to do is truly God's call and not just another distraction?
What I think we have to look at the intent behind it. Is it for personal gain? Is it for personal gratification? Or is it for the greater good? Is it going to benefit others? We have different instances where we have food giveaways or food projects or gardens where we're growing food and making it available to people who have been, as I mentioned in my sermon, food apartheid, where we don't have resources that are available to the community. Well, if you have your own personal garden, that's one thing, but then when you open it up and you share it with the community, that's for the greater good. That's not just for your personal satisfaction. It is for the community as a whole. And creating food co-ops like you have in Detroit, those are things that are inspired and they help restore a balance that has been imbalanced, that has been placed in the world today.
Yes, and that balance is so important. You assert also in the sermon that Black people have always had to tap into their creative intelligence to make a way out of no way, and that we hold the key to greatness, and that these keys to greatness can unlock our inner gifts. How do the programs of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church facilitate such a shift in focus and enable us to effectively answer the call?
Well, helping us, first of all, to raise our level of consciousness, to know that the things that we do matter, the things that have been done matter. I talked a few weeks ago about Marion Cloak, who was responsible for what is now the systems we use today, in terms of being able to talk and use electronic communications with Facebook and Zoom and different platforms. But we have different people who along the way thought of creative ways to make life better for ourselves, but we never got the credit. The credit was not given to us, So I think that we raise our level of consciousness, like we have a Black Inventors Display. We have different programs where we promote raising the consciousness of our community. And those things make a difference, because if you see that somebody has the ability to do that and that your great ideas can be used, then that empowers you, that encourages you, that makes you, that inspiration allows you to do greater things.
And could you maybe say a little more? You mentioned some of these practices in the sermon, like poor, uh, best self theology. Could you maybe briefly say a little more about those particular practices that may help
Well,
facilitate this focus?
Well, when we say best self theology, it's a theology that promotes the fact that we have our first obligation is to develop to our greatest potential so that we can act for God in the world today. If we're working on half speed, we can't do the things that we need to do in terms of restoring the balance. If we only do half of the job, the other job is left unfinished. That's not going to be sufficient. You know, I'm always encouraged when I see people participating in the Olympics and they give their all in all. But the race that they run has not been done just because they decided to get up and run that day. That there was weeks and months and years of preparation to get them to that point. And we have to do the same thing. We had to prepare ourselves. We had to get a schedule. We had to get with like-minded people, come together with a community, and realize that when we go to our greatest potential, that's how we can best serve God, not by waiting for some mythical power in the sky to do things for us when we have the ability to do things for ourselves.
Indeed. Uh, Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. Thank you for a powerful sermon and an insightful conversation today. Is there anything?
And you know what? I want to tell you, I had to give a shout out to Sister Taraji P. Henson, who at the BET Awards at the finale gave a very dynamic call for people to read Project 2025 when she was letting people know that there are plans in motion that will diminish our freedoms, diminish the democracy, and that if you didn't know about it, that you need to look it up. Look up Project 2025 and realize what the MAGA world has in store for us if we don't act. And we still have the power to act. We don't have to give in to the misinformation, the disinformation, the outright lies. We can come together as a community and we can make a difference.
As we come to the close, is there anything else that I may have overlooked or that you may like to conclude with?
Well, we each have a call to answer, and it's up to us to do it. Don't put it on voicemail. Answer the call.
And I'd like to thank you again, Bishop Dejanava, and our viewers, those of you that are viewing us. Thank you for viewing us and for joining us today. And we invite you to continue to join us. Join us again next week for our sermon, next week's sermon, and our weekly AfterWords discussion. God bless and have peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.